they found is that if you were to kind of distill what the brain actually gets addicted to, whether it's a substance or a behavior, the brain is actually addicted to what's next. Think about social media. You're on the app, and what do? You keep scrolling up, 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 because you want to keep seeing what's next. And you see something cool, and you click on it, and it gets bigger, and you watch the video, and then you shrink it back down again, and you keep moving on to what's next. And that's what actually makes somebody addicted, is they keep thinking about what's next, what's next. Now, social media is a micro example of that, but for somebody who's addicted to porn, it becomes this obsession with the next hit, the next scene, the next video. When I used to watch pornography, I did not open one video in one tab, right? I would open 25 tabs, and it was always about the next thing. I always needed to have a next thing available. So this is the epitome of addiction. So I would say there's three major root causes that all guys deal with.
If you've ever said, I just need more willpower, or once I get this app, I'm going to stop, you're not alone. But what if it's not about filters or any of the technology at all? In this episode, we're going to unpack the three roots that no one is talking about that keep good men stuck in that addiction of pornography. And if you stay with me, you'll understand exactly what's been holding you back and how to finally break free.
Leaders are not born in a womb. They are forged through heat, pressure, and a whole lot of sweat. The Fire Forged Leader podcast serves the audience through exploring leadership at work, in the community, and with the family, using a practical perspective and real-life experiences from the host, Steve Baumgartner, and his guests in the Forge. Now, it's time to enter the Forge with the Fire Forged Leader.
Sathiya, welcome to the Fire Forged Leader podcast. It is a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me. Thanks for saying my name correctly, too. Not everybody gets it right, so I appreciate that.
I'm just going to come right out of the pocket on this one. And if we could rewind the tape in Sathiya's life, and you're at your lowest point, how would we meet that man today?
Man, there's two that come to mind. My lowest point, I was 25 years old and just starting out in my career as a pastor. I'd been doing it for a while, but I was really getting in the thick of it. Starting to gain some traction. I was doing a little bit of speaking at other places because people liked what they heard from me and my ability to communicate. I was also a musician. All this is in a faith-based environment in churches. So I'm getting ready to release my worship album, songs that I've wrote that are supposed to help other people connect with God and grow spiritually. And I'm still struggling with pornography, and I am thriving career-wise, and from the outside, everyone's like, man, Sathiya's killing it. But behind closed doors, I'm just a wreck. I'm watching a lot of pornography. I don't really know how to cope with all the new expectations of me and the new pressure. And so it was the week before my album was set to release. The pressure was just on, and I didn't know how else to cope with pressure other than pornography. I just still remember that day that I watched, and I just thought, man, when you reach that breaking point where you're just like, I can't live another day like this. I felt so ashamed. I felt like such a hypocrite, and it was stealing all the joy from what was supposed to be a really exciting season of my life, launching an album and gaining some traction in my career. You're a father of 8, so I think you'll appreciate this part of the story. In that head frame of, I can't do another day like this. I can't let this happen again. My routine was, after I would watch, I would then go and pray and ask God to forgive me, and I would repent, and I would vow to never do it again. Sometimes I'd make a lofty promise in there. I just said, you know what? I'm not even going to do that. I can't keep doing what I'm doing, and it brought me this far. So I just said, God, here I am. I'm listening. It wasn't an audible voice, but it was just that still small voice in my head that was undeniably God. And he just said, you need to tell your dad. My heart just sank. It was the last thing I wanted to hear. Not that I was afraid of my dad, although I had a healthy fear of my dad, but I was 25 at that point. I think it was more, I was afraid of his disappointment. My dad was my hero growing up. The thought of him knowing the extent of how bad I was struggling with pornography was terrifying. But I told God, here I am, and I gave him a moment to speak. I wasn't going to let him speak and then not do what he told me to do. I called my dad. I told him what was going on. He was really kind about it. He actually opened up and he said, hey, I struggle too. Focus on your album launch, and when it's done, I think you should get some extra help. As much as that was a rock bottom moment for me, Steve, that was November 2015, and February 2016 is the last time I ever watched pornography. So it was only 3-4 months later that my life turned around dramatically. I owe a lot of it to that conversation with my dad, and obviously it wouldn't have happened if God hadn't spoken to me.
It's interesting. The more men that I talk to, that story seems to be the same, right? Not necessarily with pornography, but with whatever vices. It's amazing how God comes to us through our fathers. It's a
Mhm.
lot like my own story.
I think it's God's design. God is the ultimate father, and he's the perfect father. He uses our earthly fathers to give us a taste of what he's like and how good and kind he is. As I'm a young father myself now, I got 2 kiddos. I feel that excitement to be that role in their life. I feel a bit of the pressure as well. You got 8. I might need to get some advice from you at some point on how you handle all that.
Well, I have current advice. So walking that back, is that when you decided to start taking this journey away from being a pastor and doing what you're currently doing, which I also invite you to talk about a little bit?
I have a company called DeepClean that I started in 2018 that's helped over 1,000 guys quit pornography addiction. This has become just what we do over here, and we're really good at it. But my story starts in the computer lab of my Christian school when I was 11 years old. Buddy came up to me and said, "Hey, check out this site." Very innocent sounding website that to this day, unfortunately, is still pornographic. So I won't mention the actual URL, but I typed it in and I did not understand what I was looking at. I was relatively sheltered. I was kind of disgusted and intrigued all at the same time. That's kind of what it feels like when your innocence leaves you, right? It feels disgusting, but then there's a reason that you lost it in the first place. And for me, there was a lot of intrigue. I wasn't overnight addicted. It was really a couple years of going back to it and getting more interested. And this is early days of broadband internet, so it takes a couple minutes just to download an image. I was a little bit protected that way. Kids today are up against a completely different animal. For me, I was watching regularly in high school. It was pretty normalized. By the time I was in university, I was very high achieving academically. The only way I knew to cope with the pressure of getting good grades and being high achieving was to watch pornography. And that's exactly what I did. I was really addicted. I would plan my days around when I was going to watch. I could not have gone more than a day or two without watching. I needed it to get the relief. It became a fundamental part of my life. If anybody who grew up Christian or in the church knows that at some point the rubber hits the road as an adult and you have to decide, do I believe this for myself or not? For me, I reached that point while I was doing university researcher. So I got over 5 figures in research grants as an undergrad. That's how high achieving I was academically. Here I am surrounded by some of the world's sharpest minds, and they all were laughing at the idea of God, totally mocked it. All of a sudden, I had to figure out why I believe what I believe. Do I really believe it? How do I know that God is real? You know, all of those existential questions that you ask at some point in the journey. Out of that season is where I committed my life to Jesus. And it wasn't because I had parental pressure. It was my own decision. I had done my own research and my homework, and I felt like I had met God and I wanted to commit my life. And so I knew, Steve, that when I made that decision, a couple changes needed to happen in my life. I needed to start drinking responsibly or stop drinking altogether. I needed to clean up my language and stop watching pornography. The first two were, I don't know, a couple days, couple weeks tops. No matter what I did, I could not quit pornography. That's really where the Deep Clean story starts. Me realizing this stuff is way more addictive than people realize. I wish somebody would have warned me about it. The actual solutions that are out there are very trivial. Install an internet filter, get an accountability partner, pray more, white knuckle your way through it, count your streaks, try to push the streak as far as you can. Nobody had anything that actually led to any lasting change. You could do those things and get free for a couple weeks or maybe a couple months if you're really good. But I mean, I wanted it out of my life permanently, and it just felt like nobody had that answer. So I purposed in my heart that if I could figure it out, I was going to help as many other people as possible figure it out as well. Deep Clean started long before I quit pornography, about 4 years before I quit myself. After I quit watching pornography in February 2016, I waited. I had had longer bouts of freedom before, but I really needed to make sure I was completely clean. So it took almost 3 years before I launched Deep Clean.
I heard some common themes in all that story. It seemed like a very big root trigger for you was stress. Is that
Yeah,
accurate?
definitely.
Just in the few talks that I've had with men on this subject and men who have been addicted or are still struggling, I would say that that's fairly common as well.
It's very common. I think we're the most stressed generation of all time. We're all under copious amounts of stress, from reasonable stress like work expectations and expectations at home to little micro stressors, notifications on your phone, social media, and the comparison and expectations that come from that. I would say stress is kind of a presenting issue. It's really easy for guys to say, yeah, I'm stressed out too. Stress is definitely a trigger for me. Usually underneath stress is trauma and core lies we're believing. Because you and I could be working on the same team, on the same project, and I could be a total stress ball about it, and you could be totally fine because you're confident, you're sure enough of yourself that even if the project doesn't go quite the way you want it, you know you're going to be okay. You're still going to feel good about yourself. That's where some of these things underneath the surface can start to manifest. Stress is the easy access point, but usually if you pull on it a little bit more, you find there's more that meets the eye.
If stress is the connecting point, I guess is how I interpreted that. But there's all these other underlying issues that equate to how we handle stress. What are some of those other, when you're really digging down and getting to that root cause?
So I would say there's three major root causes that all guys deal with. The first is emotional immaturity, or lack of emotional development. The second would be trauma history. It's not necessarily that you had an abusive father, although that could be your story, but it's more specifically that you had moments in your life growing up that were not properly integrated. And then the third one is core lies, things that you believe about yourself and about the world that are driving your destructive behavior. That's garnered from working with 1,000+ guys personally and having served tens of thousands of guys through our platforms and our books and resources. I think any issue that a guy has underneath the surface probably lands in one of those buckets.
So starting with the core lies, that hits home with me because that's in my program, kicking right off is core identity.
Mm-hmm.
I make this correlation with men, right? You say that you're a Christian. You say that you're a son of God. The Bible also tells us that. Oh, you were designed by God. So in his image, which makes you a divine creature by nature, right? How can you say that you're worthless or you're ugly? That sounds like the same thing in what you're saying right here, is that there's lies beneath the surface that they believed over time because of some incident that happened.
Sometimes it's not about what happened to us, it's about the conclusions we draw about ourselves afterward. I'll go back to my own story, high achieving academically. This is a huge part of my story because it wasn't the university that put pressure on me. I was actually putting the pressure on myself because I believed that if I didn't perform academically, I wasn't valuable. My worth as a person was directly attached to my ability to perform. This is something I still have to combat today. Back then, I felt so much pressure and fear about not being able to perform that my insecurity would drive me to watch pornography. It would relieve me of that feeling. But truthfully, pornography also kind of gave me a sense of momentary value. It gave me a sense of connection and I have some worth or some meaning. And so I think that those core lies drive a lot more of our behavior than we realize. And usually it doesn't start with pornography. The core lies start from something else, but pornography becomes the most attractive medicator. And that's what keeps us going back to it again and again.
So I'm going to draw from my personal experience a little bit. I came from an abusive household, pulled out by the state, foster care, adoption. I grew up with what they would say is abandonment issues, but really what it comes down to is that I had a hard time believing that people would love me.
Right.
So if I look back at my use of pornography and masturbation, and I can tie it back to when I felt hurt by my wife, when I felt rejected, when I felt abandoned. So that's what we're talking about here.
Exactly. When you have those moments as an adult, they will land on pre-existing trauma. I had a dynamic with my mom growing up. My mom's an amazing woman, but I didn't really have much of an emotional connection with her. She wasn't super emotionally expressive or present. And so I had this deficiency of emotional neglect. I found it in other places. It was chasing girls and fantasizing about girls as a little kid. And then it was pornography and more intense pornography as time went on. I'm fortunate now to be married and to not have pornography as part of the equation. But still, if I have moments where I feel disconnected from my wife, that lands on those experiences I've had in the past. You articulate your story so freely. I can tell you've done your work. And that's a real gift because it gives you a little bit of context when you are having a level 10 reaction to a level 2 incident. It gives you an idea of where this is coming from. So that's a really powerful thing. A lot of guys don't want to label those things. They don't want to know about those parts of the past. It's actually where you are the most powerful because it allows you to understand why you're acting the way you're acting. And that's why most guys don't quit pornography, Steve, is because they don't actually know why they're watching. They just know that they're watching and that they want it to stop as quickly as possible. Until you know why you're watching, you can't actually change the solution long term.
That's interesting because there's also two other things that you mentioned here. And trying to understand the difference in my head between the core lies, which we just went through, and the trauma, which you said doesn't have to be that your father abused you or whatever.
Yeah.
So can we go into that a little bit so that I can understand the trauma?
Yeah, so they're heavily correlated for sure. The core lie I've had to battle the most is I'm not good enough. That's the core lie underneath a lot of my behavior. Or at least it has been. I think I'm doing much better now. In the area of pornography, I'm doing a lot better. It's been almost 10 years. I don't know where exactly that lie came from. I just know somewhere along the way as a young boy, I internalized that I'm not good enough. I can't meet people's expectations. So I need to perform the heck out of my studies to cover up for that. I know that's how it all started. It was just something that made me go, I'm not good enough, and it drove my behavior. The dynamic with my mom would be a better example of trauma because it's a series of recurring events. This relationship dynamic between us was driving my behavior. Trauma can be simple, which is a one-off incident like being abused or a car accident, whereas complex trauma is things that are ongoing. So that's kind of the separation. Trauma has more to do with events and dynamics. From that, you could draw a core lie, but core lies aren't always attached to, really obvious trauma.
Gotcha. So you also mentioned complex and one-time events or
Yes.
simple trauma. Simple trauma is probably fairly easy to get to the root of. The complex trauma, I would imagine, is a lot harder to get down to the root of because these men believe it's normal.
Sometimes complex trauma is also very obvious. I used abuse as an example of a simple trauma, assuming it's a one-time event. But if you have an abuser, which is usually the case, that's complex trauma because it's ongoing abuse. What makes it harder to pinpoint is when the nature of the trauma is not obvious. Abuse is easy to spot. Somebody who is physically, verbally, sexually abusive, easy things to spot. But when you have a dad who takes pretty good care of you, is around, but has a fuse and kind of loses it every once in a while, it's harder to pinpoint that. I was the guy who always said I had a good childhood and my parents were good. I don't think I have trauma. I don't think there's anything to talk about here. I was that guy. It took a lot of counseling and guidance for me to realize, okay, my parents were actually solid, but they weren't perfect. And if I neglect or ignore those imperfections, I'm actually robbing myself of some really critical understanding of why I do the things I do and why I'm the person that I am today. Whether you have something obvious or something that's maybe more subtle, I would say every single one of our clients has something here in this area that needs to be addressed if they really want to quit pornography long term.
So on those two, especially the trauma base, right? We're going to end up looking back at our parents, siblings, people close to us. I would imagine that a lot of guys, they hit a block at this point as well for the simple fact they love these people, right? They love their mothers and fathers. Is that a block that you guys get to and have to overcome?
You mean how do you reconcile trying to piece out trauma from with people you love and care about? Is that what you mean?
Yeah. And that could be a barrier to their success.
Yeah, it is something we have to work through with people for sure. I would have been a textbook example of that. Like I said, I believe my parents were good and there wasn't anything to discuss there. If you do reach a block, and this is why DeepClean is a system, we focus on these three areas: emotional maturity, healing from trauma, and shifting your identity. Those are the three pillars. If you do run into a block with trauma where you can't pinpoint it, there's other areas we can focus on first. And sometimes tackling the core lies and working on shifting your identity starts to give us access to some of the trauma that maybe we couldn't have found otherwise. And same with emotional maturity and development. And they all interplay that way. Guys can get very caught up in like, oh, I gotta find my trauma. We even had a guy this morning. He was asking a similar question and he's doing really well. He's been clean of pornography now for a year and a half. He's going back through some material, trying to sharpen things a little bit. And he's like, I went through this lesson, but I couldn't really find anything. And I think I've hit a wall. And I'm like, dude, you don't need to go demon hunting. You've been clean for a year and a half. There isn't too much to address at that point. All to say is guys can get obsessive with this stuff, but that's the beauty of the system and multiple pillars. If you go at something head on and you can't, that's fine. Go through one of the other pillars and you'll find your way there eventually.
That actually answers another question that was running through my mind. If men can still find freedom without finding those roots, or if they find the wrong root cause.
The two biggest mistakes people make trying to quit pornography is that they misdiagnose the real root issues. They get too attached to a solution that isn't working. Those are the two biggest mistakes guys make, and it leaves them stuck way longer than they need to be. You can misdiagnose root issues or think you found the root, but it's not quite the root. If you feel like you have the root issue and you have a community or a coach guiding you, you're going to circumvent those things quickly. It's not going to be a big deal. I think it's Abraham Lincoln who said, if I had 5 hours to chop down a tree, I'd spend the first 4 hours sharpening the axe. So we definitely take the front end part of it of trying to figure out what the root issue is pretty seriously. We don't want to jump in. Anytime somebody says, I've been listening to your podcast, I think I know what my root issues are. We always say that's great, but let's just pretend that you don't. Because we have to make sure that we know what we're actually dealing with. That way, any of the solutions that we implement and that we spend energy on, we can be pretty confident they're going to be effective. Because who wants to waste their time on a solution that's not actually going to work?
Agreed. So, your background, you have some neuropsychology in there. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Love neuroscience.
In everything that I do, I've become a big believer in CBT.
Mm-hmm. Cognitive behavioral therapy.
Is that somewhat what we're talking about here when we're trying to go through trauma and core lot and all of that, is rewiring yourself to believe something different?
So I would say that would be more applicable on what for us is our third pillar, shifting your identity. CBT is trying to shift how you think, change those thinking patterns, and ultimately forge new beliefs. That's important for shifting your identity because you cannot outbehave your beliefs. Whatever you believed about yourself, that's what made you who you are today. And if you want to live a different life, you need to think some new thoughts and believe some new things. For the trauma piece, we're very fond of a modality called inner child work. I've seen that to be the most effective and quickest way for guys to attack any trauma contributing to their sexual issues. Inner child work is quite different from CBT. It's more about getting into your origin story, things that happened when you were younger, and being able to resolve them quite quickly in a way that's very compassionate and healing. And the nice thing that the one reason we like inner child work quite a bit is that if it's taught properly, somebody can do it without a practitioner. We really don't try to keep people attached to us. We're not doing our job as coaches if people need us the rest of their lives. That's why we love inner child work. We'll guide them through it. We make sure they get their money's worth out of that process, but then we also equip them to do it themselves so that if something comes up later, they can tap into that skill set that's already been built.
Gotcha. So the third major root cause that you called out is probably going to be I love them all, but the emotional intelligence piece. And I don't think you use those words, but that's how I interpreted it.
Same idea. Yeah.
Emotional maturity, and you work with men.
Yeah.
So this is going to be a really touchy-feely question for you. If you were going to compare now to, say, 1960, and where masculinity was in 1960 and where it is today, where would you put men on that spectrum in comparison?
Wow, that's a loaded question. I think the old school definition of masculinity had some really beautiful qualities about it. To protect and to provide was just what you did. And I think there's something really beautiful about that. What was maybe missing in older definitions of masculinity was the emotional maturity side of, hey, it's actually not okay for you to get mad and lash out at your kids. That's not what a man does. I don't think we had some of the knowledge that we have now about just what it looks like to be a healthy, emotionally mature man. I think we've come a long way in that regard in the process of giving men permission to explore their emotions and everything that's come with it. We have really softened what a man looks like and probably swung the pendulum a little bit too far. That's something I've observed quite a bit, especially as our audience has grown on Instagram. Something that we get DM'd about a lot is that kind of stuff of like, I'm very confused, like I'm a young man. Am I supposed to be testosterone fueled and aggressive, and should I be attacking my dreams in life? Am I supposed to be more soft and reserved, and just trying to figure out what does it really mean to be a man? I think when a man's really healthy, he is bold and aggressive, and there's an assertive, grab life by the horns kind of approach. I think every man is designed to do that. At the same time, you can embody traditional masculinity while also having emotional awareness, emotional sensitivity, for the sake of building healthier relationships. To me, if you're too hard on just the testosterone, you end up being a bull in a china shop and you don't have a meaningful connection with your wife and kids. And I think if you dive way too deep in the emotions, it's more about feeling my feelings than connecting with people in a meaningful way. Validating and feeling your feelings are means to an end. They're not the end goal. They're a means to an end, which is to have better relationships so you can have a better quality of life. When a man is really, if we're talking about really healthy biblical masculinity, I think what we're talking about is somebody who is living with purpose and prioritizes their relationships. Easier said than done, but that is what I think it looks like.
Yeah, it's interesting. I pulled a couple different things out of there. The living with purpose. I think that's a lost art in today's world with men.
Yeah.
I would imagine that's in your third pillar when you're talking about identity.
Yes.
Men might write a vision for their company, but do they have one for home? Do they have one for their marriage? Do they have one for how they show up as a father? What do they want to be like when they're 7? They don't draw these things out. I know that one of the main issues with men that I deal with today is they have no purpose. Everybody wants to be free,
Yeah.
but nobody wants to do what it takes to get there.
We were talking about some of our mutual friends, Ryan Mickler and Larry. I spoke at one of their events not too long ago and did a talk on freedom. Freedom is kind of the centerpiece of our message. The one thing I realized as I was thinking about freedom means so many different things. There's civil freedom, and there's a big conversation happening right now about freedom of speech. And yeah, there's financial freedom and time freedom. But the thing I realized, Steve, is that there's no way to attain freedom without a war. There's always a battle that has to be won first to attain freedom. And I think you're right. And maybe it's the messaging, but technology has kind of programmed us to just have everything handed to us. Everything should be easy. And if it's hard, why bother? But if you really want freedom in life, there's a price to be paid for it. It's going to cost you something. And once you have a vision that compels you, you'll pay that price every single time.
I've never thought about freedom like that either, having to go to battle to obtain it, right? I would say, though, that freedom, you talked about financial freedom, you talked about civil freedom, all that stuff. All those are parts of freedom, but what freedom really is being able to achieve what you want. I don't think it's got to be any more complicated than that. It's just that most people don't know what they want.
Yeah. They did a study trying to figure out if there were any strong predictors of whether somebody would watch pornography and struggle with it. They call it a multivariate analysis. There are a bunch of things: relationship quality, emotional disconnection, loneliness, boredom. These are all common triggers. I was alone or bored, I had nothing better to do. But the greatest predictor was meaninglessness. If people felt no sense of purpose, they were more likely to wander into watching porn, compulsive behavior. What we're talking about here is not just, hey, this is how you become a healthy man and you should figure out what you want. This is actually immunity from addiction, sexual misbehavior, affairs, and all the things that come with pornography. You can avoid those things by finding purpose and really anchoring into it. In our community, we see this all the time. In fact, I was just running an Inner Circle. Inner Circle is our community-based membership, and it has so many stories of guys quitting pornography. As they're quitting pornography, they are starting to get more involved at church. They're starting that business they always wanted to start. They're getting promotions at work. It's a beautiful thing. You find your purpose and it drives you to quit pornography. deeper into your purpose. There's kind of a nice positive feedback loop there. This is a big deal. The beauty of all this, of even the 3 pillars we talked about earlier, emotional maturity, healing from trauma, and shifting your identity, if they do their part, they should enable you to step into your calling, to step into your destiny with as much velocity and aggression as possible. And I think when a guy's in that place, he becomes unstoppable.
And within the top 1% out of all the
Yeah.
men out there, right?
Yes.
And there's studies on that as well. It's like 3% of all of society actually has goals, and 1% actually writes them down.
It's
It's
wild.
not hard to rise to be the cream of the crop in today's society. The other thing I just wanted to mention is my little 6-year-old boy, he does these ninja classes and competitions, where they're scaling the walls and swinging. The other day he went to a competition and he's only been doing this stuff for like 2 months, right? And he placed third. It's in the back portion of a gymnastics place. I go up to the top pedestal to watch down. I'm hanging over the side, really into it. I'm looking around at these other guys. They're on their phones, just totally unengaged.
Mm,
The point that I want to make is that when my boy was coming back, the door to come out is right underneath that loft. I leaned over and I'm like, Dom, I am so proud of you. I'm just yelling and hollering at him. He got third. He could have gotten first, whatever. But he went out there. He did his best. He
Yeah.
tried like mad. When I did that, I noticed that the rest of the guys around me noticed.
They start putting their phones in their pockets.
You could see that they had some sort of admiration on their face.
Yeah.
Now, when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, you didn't have dads that did that. That was just not right. But you could tell that there was a natural connection in, you are my son, for who I'm well pleased.
Mm,
There was just that natural connection to that when I said I was proud of him.
yeah. Now, you told me before we hit record that you also eliminated pornography from your life at some point. Is that right?
Yes.
So what's really powerful about what you're saying, Steve, is they've studied a lot of brains that are addicted in general, not specifically pornography, but what they found is that if you were to distill what the brain actually gets addicted to, whether it's a substance or a behavior, the brain is actually addicted to what's next. So if you think about social media, you're on the app, and what do? You keep scrolling up. You see something cool, click on it, watch the video, shrink it back down, and keep moving on to what's next. That's what makes somebody addicted. They keep thinking about what's next. Social media is a micro example of that, but for somebody who's addicted to porn, it becomes the next hit, the next scene, the next video. When I used to watch pornography, I did not open one video in one tab. I would open 25 tabs, and it was always about the next thing. I always needed to have a next thing available. This is the epitome of addiction. The beautiful antidote to a brain that is not addicted and is actually healthy is that it is present in the moment. And what you're sharing is so powerful. What I'm hearing you say is you were present in that moment, real time. Nothing else mattered other than Dom doing his thing and you, his dad, supporting him, cheering him on. And that is so powerful. I personally believe the ability to be present is going to be a superpower over the next 20, 25 years, because the world is becoming so programmed and so conditioned to obsess over what's next. If you can learn how to be present like what you're articulating, you will quickly rise to the top, because it's becoming harder and harder to do that.
That's amazing. My problem is that's where all business is done.
On the phone.
Yeah, as you well
Yeah.
know, right? Anything with coaching, you're trying to wake someone up from the matrix, right? You're not going to find these guys in the gyms. So, talking about your coaching, you're talking about something with a tremendous amount of shame that's wrapped around it. I mean, I even have a hard time saying the word masturbation, right? It's this icky word that comes out of my mouth. Pornography, it's not as bad because it's become so mainstream. You have these guys who are volunteering to put their shame right out there. And that's a huge first step. When these guys come to you, are they at their absolute rock bottom when you start to work with them? Or is it something that they're just kind of sticking their toes in the water and maybe starting to think that they have a problem?
That's a great question. There's a couple layers to this. I got asked this on another podcast. The guy was like, "You must have a lot of incels and creepy dudes in your community." I was like, "No. If I showed you a screenshot of the guys on my Zoom calls, you're looking at doctors, surgeons, professional athletes, business owners, accountants, engineers. I mean, these are people that you're going to see at church, people that you see on the street, people that, probably file your taxes for you and perform operations on your loved ones. So that's the first thing I want to say, because what you said is so true. There is so much stigma to this. There is so much shame, and it's hard for people to feel like there's not something fundamentally wrong with them. I love what scripture says. Is Proverbs 28:13. Who does not confess his sins will not prosper, but he who does confess and forsakes them will find mercy. You asked, how do people overcome the shame and why are people coming to us? It's for a variety of reasons. We have people who are in dire situations. They got a marriage on the line because the wife found out. They got an engagement on the line because their fiance found out and doesn't want to get married until it's dealt with. Unfortunately, we have a lot of guys who have lost their jobs. They are watching on, work computer, that kind of thing, and they didn't realize there was tracking software or whatever it might be. So you have these big, urgent red flag, I need help now. And those people, we generally recommend our more hands-on intensive coaching program for that kind of thing. But we also have other guys who, I wouldn't say they're maybe getting their feet wet, but they've done the first step of, okay, I'm not concealing my sins. I'm not hiding them. I've confessed them and I want to forsake them. But they don't always have a place to go because no one's talking about it at their church. No one's ever brought it up in their friend groups. There's nowhere really to go. And so we've created a place for that as well. That's what the inner circle is, the group I was telling you about earlier. The inner circle is a place of people who are still taking it very seriously. They just know that if they have community, some system, and some accountability along the way, they're probably going to get everything they need. But that's always where we recommend people start with us, unless your situation's dire and you need to get this solved right away. Otherwise, the inner circle is great. If you're not getting what you need there, people can move their way up. So that's generally what it looks like. We really want to make sure that, because this can be a very shameful thing. He was a friend of mine, still is a friend of mine to this day. He was in a precarious situation in his marriage, and he decided to sign up for the program. He sent me a text the next day and he said, "Hey, do you have any content for people as soon as they sign up for your program?" And I was like, "Yeah, we have the course. That's DeepClean. That's literally what you just signed up for." And he's like, "No. I mean, like, I've never felt so ashamed in my life when I signed up for the program yesterday, because I think I just realized this is what it's come to." That was a real gift he gave me. We have a lot of guys who join and they're excited and they finally have a solution. It made me realize, just because somebody's come to you and they say, "Hey, I'm struggling with this," and they've brought a lot of things out into the light, it doesn't mean that the shame still isn't there and that they need somebody to still look them in the eyes and say, "Hey, dude, you're amazing. And you are a beloved son, and in you God is well pleased." We all need that, and we need it constantly. It's a big thing that we are working on throughout the duration of somebody's tenure with us.
I was sitting there thinking about all walks of life, all sorts of men, lawyers, doctors. I did an entire series on counter human trafficking. I'm friends with a lot of these people, love that work.
Yeah.
And they say the exact same thing about men. Well, anybody who's into trafficking, but it's grossly men, right?
Yeah.
There are some women, but it's mostly men. And then I tie that back to what you were saying about what's next. So are there legitimate ties that could lead someone to, this is the next hit? If you start out at 10 years old and now you're looking for prostitution or getting into sex buying.
That's a really good question. Have you heard of Exodus Cry before, Steve? Familiar with that organization? They've been doing work in fighting human trafficking for a long time. I think they started in 2013 or 14. I had Benji Nolot, the founder, on my podcast. He shared something fascinating with me. When they first started out, their interest was in sex trafficking. Where is this happening? Why is this happening? And everything around it. They did this big documentary, very media driven, exposing the magnitude and gravity of sex trafficking in our society. And then they asked themselves, why do these brothels even exist in the first place? Who are these people making this happen? Who's paying their hard-earned dollars to keep these institutions in business? So they spent the next 5 years researching the red light districts of Thailand, Cambodia, Amsterdam, all around the world, trying to figure out the commonality in all these men engaging in very risky sexual behaviors by paying for and buying sex. They found that most of these guys were typical people. They came from different walks of life, stages of life, upbringings, social statuses, and financial situations, but they all had one thing in common. They were exposed to pornography at a young age. There's not necessarily a specific profile of you, if you have this personality type or you have this kind of upbringing. There's a lot of complexity to this, but if you were exposed under the age of 15, most people today are exposed between the ages of 8 and 11. If you were exposed at a young age, the chances of you developing something more problematic in your adult years is significantly higher because your brain is not developed yet. And so it develops that reliance, that dependency. And there's very few things in life that can compare to the perfectly produced pornography that we've all become very comfortable with in this day and age. Early exposure is a really strong predictor. And then I would just say relationship issues or relationship dysfunction would be another really strong predictor, whether that's trauma or you just don't like. That was something I used to always hear from girlfriends was like, I felt like getting to know you the first few months was amazing. And then all of a sudden it felt like there was no more depth after that, because I was very relationally dysfunctional. I didn't know how to really let somebody in. I was very guarded and closed off. And so relationship issues is another one that can really drive people's porn use.
So I'm sitting here listening about these young children being exposed, right? And I've known the statistics for a while, but it hits me. So the first question I got around that is that say you got a man who's sitting in front of you who's like 35 years old and he's been on the pornography train since he was 9, 10 years old. And you talk about the rewiring of his brain. Is it possible for that man at 35 years old to rewire it? We're not as pliable as we once were.
Yes, absolutely. It's possible to rewire your brain. All the research and everything we've witnessed in our coaching practice at DeepClean suggests that you can reverse 99.99% of the effects that porn might have had on you as an adolescent. I believe that is God's design. God has designed us really beautifully because we do make stupid decisions when we're young, when our brains aren't fully developed. In His mercy and in His grace and through the renewing of our minds has actually given us a way to reverse all those effects and impacts. We've had clients as old as 80 do our program, Steve, and they've quit pornography and restored connection in their marriage that was stale and stagnant. It feels like they get a second life. So 35 is nothing. These guys are in their latter years and their brains are still being rewired. Sure, the brain is more plastic when you're younger, but if you have the right processes, the right systems in place, and you and I both know how powerful it is when guys are in community, when you're with like-minded men pursuing a vision together, you can accelerate those results in surprising ways. Absolutely. It doesn't matter what your age is, your brain can change and heal if you have the right tools.
Absolutely. That is a tremendous amount of hope for men. These are the guys that I'm working with, and I'm sure you hear the same sorts of things. They just believe that this is all there is to life, right? Distant relationship with their wife, kids that disrespect them. They go to work, they come home, they bring home the paycheck, everybody else spends it. Being able to bring back that purpose, rewire your mind, put those addictions down and live your life again is absolutely amazing and hopeful.
I think this is a really important. One of the reasons that guys get stuck with pornography addiction is because they don't have anybody around them who has actually quit porn that they could talk to. The reason that is such a big deal is because we all know the story about the 4-minute mile, right? I'm forgetting, is it Roger Bannister? Is that his name? The man who, the first person to run a mile in under 4 minutes. Nobody thought it was possible until one person did it. And that's the power of being in a community, especially when a community is led by somebody who's walked in freedom. You have championed so many things in your own life. You have the most incredible story ever. So you're able now to help other people say, hey, I've been where you are. In fact, my situation was worse than yours, and I made it out. And when you have that guide that's reminding you, oh, this is possible, he did it, that is very, very powerful. So we've actually tapped into this when clients work with us, whether they're in the inner circle or they do our higher level coaching programs. We give everybody access to the Recovery Hall of Fame. Basically, what it is it's a collection of recovery stories, all kinds of different walks of life, but people that have quit pornography through the DeepClean system so that guys can always go there and remind themselves it is possible. You can do this. If it worked for him, it's going to work for you as well. Because without that daily reminder, it's the same reason that we do 4 or 5 episodes of podcast content a week. We want to be in people's ears every single day, reminding their spirit, their brain, and their heart, you can do this. Freedom is possible and you can do it. Without that, it's very hard to continue on the journey long enough to get the results you want.
Going to take it back just a step to the 10-year-old, 9-year-old watching these things for the first time. And it reminds me of just this stuff has seemed to subsided a little bit, probably because I'm very conscious about hitting the don't show me any more of this content. But there's all sorts of things out there. A video will be playing and then a naked woman will pop up for 0.1 second, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of rabbit trails out there of the porn industry. Click on this, and then all of a sudden you're down a rabbit hole with Pornhub or whoever it is, right?
Yeah.
Going back to counter human trafficking, I remember someone told me that over 80% of the people in the porn industry are actually being trafficked. When I put all this stuff together, it seems like they're grooming kids for this entire life all the way throughout.
They're trying to groom kids either to participate in the content production side of it or to be a consumer. The industry knows that if kids get exposed at a young age, they are more likely to consume pornography as adults and engage in riskier behaviors, which typically means spending money to get some sort of experience in return. There's a lot of legislation being passed now to protect minors, to require more age verification, not just check a box that says I'm 18, but actual documentation before you get access. And the industry is outraged. They are pushing back as hard as they possibly can because they know the business model relies so much on kids getting involved at a young age. Whether it starts off very innocent and it develops, or whether they're grooming kids and trafficking them, there's a lot of dangers here. AI is going to be another tool that this industry will leverage to access our children and get them exposed and hooked very early.
Agreed. And they're already using it with some of their CSAM materials and things like that.
Exactly.
It's absolutely horrible. I remember some news articles a while back talking about one of the major providers and how much child material was on their platform. They had such a robust system after 12 or 15. I can't remember what it was, but it was, I mean, I'm like, really, guys?
Yeah.
But it was like 12 or 15 reports. They'd look into it.
I know exactly what you're talking about. They had such few staff compared to the number of videos being uploaded that a video would have to get reported a lot before it would actually grab their attention. Visa and MasterCard found out because there was a bunch of press about this and they pulled their relationship with this company. The company got really upset and overnight removed all of the material that had any reported underage or anything that even could have been borderline with people that were either underage or non-consensual. That was another big issue in the content that was being uploaded to the platform. Guess what percentage of their material was gone overnight? 80%.
Holy smoke.
80% of material had people that were either underage and did not consent to the video being recorded or being uploaded.
Wow. They're not checking any sort of documents in the door, are they?
No.
My
No.
gosh.
And it's so funny because this company has new ownership and they've tried to rebrand. Now, their big claim is for you to upload a video, you have to go through an age verification process. If I wanted to upload something pornographic, they scan my license and compare it against biometric data. These guys did a big PR push. They were on Patrick Bet-David and a bunch of big podcasts. Everybody kept asking them, okay, that's great, but what about the video itself? So sure, the person uploading the video is of age, but who cares? How are you guys going to be sure that the person in the video is actually of age? And they just deflected the question every single time.
All sick ever, right?
How do you know that every single person in that video is over the age of 18 and that they consented to be in that video and to have it uploaded for public access? It's almost impossible with the model of anybody can upload a video. The industry's a mess and it's only going to get messier.
Yeah. We got to work on the freedom end. We got to wake people up from the matrix.
Yeah, and that's why your life matters so much, because you could be the person who changes a lineage. I have 2 boys, and I think about it every day. Like, what would happen if I was still struggling with pornography right now? What would that mean for my boys and their boys and so on. Because I've quit pornography, I can't guarantee that my kids are going to be perfect in this area. I can almost guarantee you they will get exposed at some point, but I'm equipped. I have a story now of overcoming it. I can say, follow my example. A lot of fathers can't even say that. And I know how to at least have some healthy conversations around this subject so that my kids don't end up hopeless and aimless and without any knowledge about this issue. You make the world a better place. When the man gets better, the world gets better. I really believe that this is so much bigger than you. This could literally change the world and make it a better place.
Absolutely, my friend. Absolutely. So that was absolutely awesome, man. I think too, at the tail end, the industry and the material that's going up on it, right? If that hits you or if anything else in this hits you, you need to reach out immediately. Get in the inner circle, start doing the work. This is something that's just completely tearing down our society, in my opinion.
Yeah.
We're in full alignment on that. Give the audience a little bit on how they can find you, where they can find the Inner Circle, your programs.
If you want to find out about Inner Circle, go to deepcleancoaching.com, and I'll send the link over to you so you can have it in the show notes. Deepcleancoaching.com. That'll give you everything you need to know. For people who want to learn more before they take a step, the podcast is a great resource. It's called The Man Within, and it's available everywhere that podcasts are hosted. Those are the two best places to start.
Yeah, and you can't get away from that beautiful voice of yours. There's something about an amazing voice on a podcast or a radio show. The episodes that I listen to tell a great story. Even if you don't have a problem, I suggest the podcast.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate that. Thanks
You
for
are
having me.
most
This has been
welcome.
great.
I appreciate you being on. God bless you. We'll have to hook up more after this and see how everything's going.
I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you, sir.
You have just experienced the heat and pressure of the forge. Remember, words without action are meaningless. Now, after the heat of the forge, shape your thoughts, quench your brain, then put your new tools to use, adding to your leadership. Tune in next week for more lessons from the forge.